Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Atu-kway. I am and I do hope to be your African-centered tutor in the very near future. My area of interest is education, specifically speaking, African-centered education, and my topic of interest is, of course, knowledge of self, which you can see represented behind me in the Baobab framework. Now, as you always hear me saying, the Baobab framework is a framework for the study of self, and it was designed to be used as a tool to help build African organization and to break African bondage. And we do this by creating an environment where we can participate in whole systems thinking and self-observe. When we're able to observe our actions, we can then begin to think and act as a nation or a tribe with a new level of clarity. And of course, clarity is what we are trying to attain, especially if we as a people or as a group of people are suffering from identity confusion. Okay, this is why my focus is mainly on self-education, self-knowledge, because these are the things that will help us to cure our identity confusion. This is a group-wide pathology, personally speaking, and especially from, if you go into the notes and if you do the homework, you find that the master teachers have been talking about the identity confusion that we suffer as a people, which leads to a whole host of the problems that we always complain about, or that we always speak about as part of our day-to-day experiences. Okay, so I do these videos to help educate us to understand that there are people who have actually looked at these problems properly and have come up with so many solutions. So sometimes we don't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel, but we can do our homework, or in other words, we can do our research in order to find out what the leading minds or the masterminds or our master teachers, what they said about the things that we have to do in order to regain our true identity, so that we can then begin to, I guess, lead the lives or attain the liberation that we all need to attain on the face of this planet. Okay, so without much ado, let's get into today's video. Today's video is a continuation of video number 4, which was entitled Challenges Facing African Blacks and Caribbean People Who Want to Engage in Self-Development. And of course, this video is part of my African Self-Development series, which I hope will be able to enlighten us as African people, or anyone who's watching, on who African people are, who we are as a people, and what the standards or the requirements are for you if you want to develop yourself as an African person, or as an African group of people. As I always say, the African self is unlike any other self on the face of the planet, so it's important for us to take our time and take care when we are developing this African self, or this self that we want to develop. We want to make sure that we don't develop just our personal minds. We want to develop our tribal ancestral selves. We want to develop our physical bodies. And we want to develop the social aspect of our lives as well, which means that we will be able to balance or rebalance the nature or the type of social relations that we have on the face of this planet. Okay, let's get into today's video. Okay, I don't want to keep this too long. I don't want to keep it too long, and of course I know that your time is precious, so let's get into today's video, which I said is a continuation of video number 4, entitled Challenges Facing African People, or African Blacks or Caribbean People Who Want to Engage in Self-Development. In the last video, I started by saying that the prerequisite for problem solving is to do the homework that is necessary to understand the works of those who have already done much homework for us. And this was said by our master teacher, Dr. Asa G. Hiller III, in an article that he wrote in April 2000, entitled The State of Education. And in that article, he lists about 12 key challenges that we face as African people who are engaged in education. What I have done is modified those notes, and I have linked them to self-education, or knowledge of self, because of course the foundation, or the foundational basis for an education, is a knowledge of self. Okay, so let's get into it. Now, after I did my research, or from this article actually, it Dr. Asa Hilliard laid out about 4 key points where he's calling on us as a community of people to do with regards to education. Okay, so again, this is literally goes hand in hand with self-education, as I've been saying. Okay, so, and I think I read this in the previous video as well, so please, if you haven't seen that video, please go check out that video plus the other videos. Hopefully they'll all help to make sense of what I am saying over here. So he was saying that as African people on the face of the planet, we have to develop an independent vision of self. These are the things that we need to do as African people. We have to develop an independent vision of self. And by that, I will take that to mean that we have to develop a vision of ourselves that is independent of Eurocentric, any other group of people's definition of who we are. Okay, so we have to develop an independent vision of ourselves. He also wants us to develop a vision of self that is grounded in our cultural and historical reality, as well as in our present political and economic conditions. In video number 3, I talked about the social amnesia that we suffer as a group or as a people on the face of this planet, and how that condition, coupled with the nature of our present political and economic condition, which can be described as a system of racism, white supremacy, how that actually impacts us and how that makes us act as a people and how that impacts all other people on the face of this planet. Okay, so it's not just to say that racism, white supremacy only impacts Africans and Black people. It impacts all people on the face of the planet. These videos are aimed at African, Black, Caribbean people. Okay, so in these videos I will be talking exclusively to or at African, Black, or Caribbean people who are interested in self-education. That's who I'm speaking to. So of course, if this is something that doesn't interest you, there are hundreds of millions of other things to do. You can go and entertain yourself doing those things. Okay, let me get back into my notes. The third thing that our master teacher, Dr. Asa G. Hilliard, wants us to do is to have a vision of self that is based upon an understanding of hegemony and education in its direct and indirect forms and the structures that it creates. And this goes back to my last point about the system of racism, white supremacy, and how we have to understand it as a people. Okay, and the fourth thing that he wants us to do, of course, is to develop a vision of self that is rooted in our excellence tradition of education / socialization, one of the most awesome traditions in the world. Okay, so we have to develop a vision, an independent vision of self. We have to develop a vision of self that is grounded in our cultural and historical reality, as well as in our present political and economic condition. We have to develop a vision of self that is based upon an understanding of hegemony and education in its direct and indirect forms and the structures that it creates, as well as developing a vision of self that is rooted in our excellence tradition of education or socializations as African people on the face of this planet, one of the most awesome traditions in the world. Okay, so let's get into today's notes. I'm going to carry on reading my notes from this book. Pen's falling out. I'm going to carry on reading from my notes from this book, Know Thyself, by our master teacher, Dr. Naeem Akbar. I'm going to be reading from chapter 2, entitled The Definition of Self, and I've read a bit of that chapter in previous videos, so I'm going to carry on from where I left off in the last video. Okay, so as I say, thank you for taking time out of your precious day to watch my videos. I do hope that these videos do help to make a transformational difference in your life. I do know, as I always say, that these videos are not necessarily like entertaining videos, and these are actually serious videos per se. Okay, so I can't make it too entertaining, or I'm not sure how to make it too entertaining. But also there are tons of other videos online that are educational and entertaining. We don't always have to be entertained. Sometimes we can just sit down and try and understand some of these serious points, because I don't know how you can make drawing, like for example, if an architect is drawing a building or something, you have to make sure you don't make mistakes, because people's lives depend on this. Okay, so equally, everything doesn't have to be entertaining, and we have to figure out ways of ingesting things which are serious. Okay, so let's get into today's notes. Okay, so I'm reading from as I said, Know Thyself by our master teacher, Dr. Naeem Akbar, in chapter 2, entitled The Definition of Self. I'm going to be reading from the last paragraph of page 21, and I'm going to carry on, okay? So the education system of Africa focused on moral instruction as the essential part of learning. And I'm reading this to tie in with the 4 key challenges that we have to face as African people. I'm reading that in relation to meeting the requirements of building or developing an African self, okay? I hope that these videos are beginning to give you an understanding of what I mean by self-development from the African centered perspective, okay? Let's carry on. The educational system of Africa focused on moral instruction as the essential part of learning. The translation of works such as the Hussein I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but the Hussein by Dr. Maulana Karenga and the teachings of Ptah-hotep, the oldest book in the world, edited by Dr. Asa Haley, our master teacher, are examples of the importance of such moral instruction as a part of one of the world's most successful educational systems, that of ancient Kemet. The continuation of such moral instruction in the proverbial teachings of West African societies demonstrates the persistence of this idea that the soul must be cultivated as an important component of the educational system. As African people, we realize that a lot of us are very, well, when you grow up in Africa, at least you find that there's lots of proverbs, especially if you're growing up as a child in Africa, you do something, you probably hear an adult come up to you and they'll give you like a proverbial kind of warning. And this, well, as growing up, I didn't really understand what all of this was about. But now looking back at what our master teacher is saying and understanding that this tradition of building our moral selves was something that was part and parcel of the African-centered education system that was in Africa, that was being controlled and that was being used by our ancestors in those times, okay? And you can see that even today with regards to our moral traditions as African people, okay, in West Africa, in East Africa, in different parts of Africa, that we have a morality or level of morality that is unmatched, let's say, on the face of this planet, okay? Or it's unlike any other kind of morality on the face of this planet. And sometimes you could almost say that we're moral to a fault, almost. But again, this is a legacy of our history, and this is something that we have to understand. And it helps me to understand myself a lot better. Hopefully it helps you to understand yourself, okay? Let's carry on. So the continuation of such moral instruction in the proverbial teachings of West African societies demonstrates the persistence of this idea that the soul must be cultivated as an important component of the educational system. And examples of the teachings from Ptah-hotep, principle number 8, is: if you are a man who leads, a man who controls the affairs of many, then seek the most perfect way of performing your responsibility so that your conduct will be blameless. Great is Ma'at, truth, justice, and righteousness. I'm going to say that bit again. If you are a man who leads, a man who controls the affairs of many, then seek the most perfect way of performing your responsibility so that your conduct will be blameless. Great is Ma'at, truth, justice, and righteousness. Now, first of all, these proverbial words where he's saying that if you're a man who leads, a man who controls the affairs of many, then seek the most perfect ways of performing your responsibility so that your conduct will be blameless. This is something that I'm sure sounds quite similar from something that you will read in the Bible, okay? The only difference is that at the end, they're saying that great is Ma'at, truth, justice, and righteousness. Now, many of you who have heard of Ma'at, and I showed an image of Ma'at in my last video where I was saying that this is what Ma'at looks like. Now, people will say that Ma'at is a goddess, and then people also go on and say that Ma'at was worshipped. And as I said in my previous video or my last video, in an African-centered perspective, science and religion are one and the same. Okay, no one, as far as I know, is worshipping or was worshipping Ma'at as a goddess. Okay, we paid high reverence to the fact that these were principles that we had noted with regards to our relationship with nature, and we seen how nature, or how nature maintained order in the macroscope or the macroscopic world. In our own individual microscopic world, if that's how you even want to put it, or in our small world that we're living in, we can apply some of these universal principles to benefit our lives, because these were the bigger principles at play in the universe. So this is a universe of order, not a universe of chaos. So that we're then trying to apply that order into our own human lives. I don't perceive of this as someone worshipping or waking up and praying to a goddess per se. Okay, this is something that is scientific and religious, not religious dogmatic, as in you have to do this every day, or you have to do. No, this is applying universal scientific principles to your own personal life. Okay, no one's worshiping a goddess. People are anyone who's truthful, anyone who is for justice, and anyone who is for righteousness. If they're put into a position of leadership, when they lead and they control the affairs of many, they will seek the most perfect way of performing their responsibility so that their conduct will be blameless. Of course, many of our leaders, we can say for a fact today and in the past, I don't know, 100, 200 years, okay, we can say that, I can not say that their conduct has not been blameless, okay, for whatever reasons, whether you support them or not. Anyways, let's carry on. It is everlasting. Ma'at has been unchanged since the time of Osiris. To create obstacles to the following of laws is to open way to a condition of violence. To create obstacles to the following of laws is to open way to a condition of violence. The transgressor of laws is punished, although the greedy person overlooks this. Baseness may obtain riches, yet crime never lands its wares on the shore. In the end, only Ma'at lasts. Man says, Ma'at is my father's ground. So this is Dr. Naim Akbar, our master teacher, providing us with an example of some of the teachings from Ptahhotep, which was, I think the teachings of the book of Ptahhotep is one of the oldest books in the world, and was written by our ancestors, the ancient Egyptians, or we call them the ancient Egyptians, but just for today's words, our ancestors. Okay, these were works written by people who look like me and you. Okay, now the above example is an indication of how morality is an integral part of the educational system of the ancients of the Nile Valley civilization. The above example is an indication of how morality is an integral part of the educational system as the ancients of the Nile Valley civilization conceived it. Another example from the book of Keti, as quoted by Maulana Karenga in the Huzia, shows another example of the role of morality in the Nile Valley's concept of education. Speak truth in your house, that the princes of the earth may respect you. Righteousness is fitting for a ruler, for it is the front of the house that inspires respect in the back. Do that which is right, that you may live long upon the earth. Comfort the weeper and oppress not the widow. Drive no one away from the property of his or her father. Defraud not the nobles of their property. Beware of punishing unjustly. Do not kill, for it will not profit you. So now again, these are readings that sound very biblical, or at least even very proverbial. Now, if you are someone who, I grew up in West Africa, okay, so as I said, I grew up reading or hearing lots of idiomatic expressions, lots of proverbs, mixed with a whole host of Christian religious stuff as well. But this is part and parcel of who we are as Africans, okay? We don't necessarily have to always, per se, go to like the religious world for morality, okay? We have morality already naturally inbuilt into the African self. We just need to go back and find out what this African self is like, so that we can rediscover the levels of morality that we have or had in those days, okay? And I know some people will be like, well, that morality never really necessarily led us anywhere. Now we're enslaved and we're in chains, or we were enslaved and we're in chains, and that didn't do anything for us. What happened with regards to our interaction with Europeans or the Arabs and any of the other groups of people who came into contact with Africans on the African continent and who didn't mean us anything positive? What happened in those interactions happened, and they've happened, okay? It shouldn't necessarily mean that you should just give up everything about yourself because something happened, okay? Just because someone else is acting on you. You also, we have to maintain, or we have to rebuild or redevelop those aspects of ourselves that got us to the height, or to the heights that no one else has achieved on the face of the planet, okay? So we need to at least take a look, okay? Take an honest look at these things, these aspects of our moral self. I'm not saying we all have to become super moral people, or we have to go back into like some old African tradition and find out the morality that was living back then, and then transpose that level of morality back to today and then try and apply it. No, what I'm saying is just have a look at, just gain more information about the African self, which is what I'm doing in this video. I'm reading more and more so that you gain more and more of an understanding of what the African self is about, so that you understand when I made the statement that the African self is unlike any other self on the face of the planet, okay? So if you are going to develop it, you have to take your time and you have to take care. You don't want to go and develop some other self, an aspect of yourself, a fragment of yourself, and not your whole African self, okay? Let's carry on. These principles were fundamental ideas of ancient education. I'm going to say this again. These principles were the fundamental ideas of ancient education. They addressed the spiritual core of the individual's makeup and were assumed to be the essence of education. The essence of education were assumed to be the essence of education. These moral instructions were intended to educe the spiritual core, or the soul, of the African self. Now, this tradition of education by moral instruction has been continued into African proverbs that emphasize morality as an essential part of learning. Now, in West Africa, the following proverbs reflect the value of these thoughts. A wise man who knows his proverbs can reconcile difficulties. A proverb is the horse of conversation. When the conversation lag, a proverb revives it. What the child says he has heard at home. If you offend, ask for pardon. If offended, forgive. A good deed is something one returns. Knowledge is like a garden. If it is not cultivated, it cannot be harvested. I love the last one. Knowledge is like a garden. If it is not cultivated, it cannot be harvested. Of course, the reader might say that similar moral teachings are found in most religious teachings, such as the Holy Bible or Holy Quran. They would be quite correct, since those teachings were evolved from the Nile Valley's educational concepts. The difference, I'm going to read that a bit again. I think I may have read that a little bit too fast, and people may have missed it a little bit. But okay, let's go. Of course, the reader might say that similar moral teachings are found in most religious teachings, such as the Holy Bible or Holy Quran. They would be quite correct, since those teachings were evolved from the Nile Valley's educational concepts. The difference is that the moral proverbs that we have illustrated above are from the African educational system and are not limited to the religious literature. The African conception of a holistic self required that moral instruction should be at the core of the educational process. Dr. Karenga says in Huzia, given the inseparable link in ancient Egypt and other parts of Africa between the sacred and secular, the attempt to separate them makes little sense and meets with even less success. I'm going to read that slightly better. Given the inseparable link in ancient Egypt and other parts of Africa between the sacred and secular, the attempt to separate them makes little sense and meets with even less success. Thus, the sages teach their children, and the people think Ma'at, speak Ma'at, and do Ma'at in secular and sacred institutions. For this will not only ensure a mutually beneficial community based on my act, but also everlasting life. Okay, there wasn't a separation between secular life and the religious life.